On the screen will be a big picture of the museum. Quiet. Bottom will be 4 little pictures. One of them will be my classroom. So I'm either going to keep it on that eagle or I might have it up. You're not waving or doing anything else. Okay? Mr. Woodman just said he would like you to take notes, anything you find interesting. If you want to just give somebody next to you a sheet of paper for somebody I told you don't forget anything. And then we can ask questions. So I'm going to pass the sticky notes around. You take one. And if you want to write a question, I can type it in for you. Molly, you're going to still do it. Okay? Pass it back. Take one, pass it back. Some people need paper. Cameron needs a sheet of paper.
I need a pencil.
Yeah. Okay. Can you borrow from somebody? He wants you to take notes. He's going to ask you about it tomorrow. Something you found interesting. We'll get a pencil.
Can I go get her pencil? Yeah, I need
Starting at quarter two?
I'm broadcasting.
Our soldier here.
All right, we are ready to go on this end whenever you guys are ready.
Okay, can I go? Can you guys hear me?
Yep. Yeah.
Wave if you can hear.
Oh,
All right. Ready? Okay. Well, hi, everybody. My name's Doug. I'm Doug Dahman. I'm from the Civil War Museum down here in Kenosha. We're really glad that we've been able to do this with you today. It's the first time we've ever done anything like this, so we're going to learn just as much from doing this with you today as hopefully you'll learn from us. If there's any technical problems, I'm sure your teachers will step in and let us know, and you'll have the chance to ask questions of me and Brett later on in the presentation. So what I really wanted to do today is, since you guys couldn't come down to see our museum, is get some of our artifacts out. I'm in our collection storage room right now, and what I really wanted to do was get a few things out to get you as up close and personal as we could using the computer technology to show you some of the pieces of a Civil War uniform, what sort of jackets, coats, weapons, medical items, images, some of the things that we have in our collection, just to get you an opportunity to get up close and personal with them. I can demonstrate a few things for you, talk a little bit about what makes them unique, and then take your questions at the end. So that's kind of where we're going. One of the things that I find interesting about the Civil War is, it happened 150 years ago, and people are still studying it today, and people are still really interested in it today. I mean, you may have taken a trip down to see our museum, or hopefully you will after seeing us today. Or maybe you and your family have gone out to Gettysburg or gone to a different battlefield or seen a movie about the Civil War. And it's like, why do people still find it interesting today? Why do we still study it? Why does it, why do people still collect these objects? And I think there's really two reasons why people still get into the Civil War and really want to know more about it and want to study more about it. And the one aspect is the fact that the soldiers were literate. 90% of the American population could read and write at the time of the Civil War. And what I have here, you can't see it very well, these are letters written by a Civil War soldier to his family. And the guy's name was Isaac Bishop. And the story about Isaac Bishop was he was from Kenosha, here in southeastern Wisconsin, and he ended up serving in an Illinois regiment, meaning that he didn't serve with other Wisconsin soldiers. He went across the border into Illinois and joined the 55th Illinois. Why did he do that? Well, he went down to try to find the rest of his friends down in southern Illinois to join a Wisconsin regiment, and when he got there, it was all full. They didn't have any room for him. So he ended up serving in the 55th Illinois, and there were a lot of guys from the 55th Illinois from the Chicago area, from the Waukegan area, which isn't too far from Kenosha. And I bet he went down there and saw some people that he knew from Illinois and said, you know what, this is a good regiment, I'll join. And he served in what we call the Western Theater of the War. He served along the Mississippi River, and specifically at a place called Vicksburg. And these letters, the two letters that we have, were written by Isaac Bishop home to his sisters in the spring of 1863 when he was near Vicksburg. And what's really interesting about the letters is that there's no censorship. He gets to write whatever he wants to write about, conditions in the Army. He asks questions about people at home, how the family's doing, have you seen so-and-so, has so-and-so got married, what's been going on at home. And he also writes a lot about what's going on in the Army, what he likes, what he doesn't like, the battles that he's seen. And no one is telling him, hey, you can't write about that, or you can't tell your family this. And so these letters really give us an uncensored view of what life was like for these individual soldiers. So they're great first-hand, primary source documentation as to what it was like on a day-to-day basis for these soldiers. And a lot of these exist. You can still find them. A family in the local area had these, and they ended up here at the museum. So maybe your own family has some of this stuff at home in a drawer or somewhere, but you can still find those letters and diaries around. So that's one of the reasons why the Civil War, I think, is still so popular today. And the other reason are these. I'll pull this up. What I'm showing you these are images of Civil War soldiers. And photography was obviously invented before the Civil War. Photography was invented by a Frenchman in 1839. And so soldiers, after they enlisted in the Army, one of the first things they did after they got their uniform was to go to a photographic studio and get their picture taken. Why did they do that? Well, they wanted to send them home. They'd send them home to their mom, they'd send them home to their girlfriend, they'd send the pictures home to their wives, their family, their fathers, whomever, just to show everybody, hey, this is what I look like in my military uniform. These are pretty cool. And there were a bunch of different ways that you could get your picture taken during the Civil War. And I'm going to show you 3 examples as best I can. Here's an image of a guy. He's seated. He's got a 9-button frock coat on. And this is called a tintype. The image is mounted on a piece of metal on the back side. This is the back of the picture. And you can see it's mounted on metal. It's pretty sturdy. So the nice thing about these tintypes is that they wouldn't break. You could take them, you could put them in your pocket, you could send them home in the mail, and they were very sturdy. I've got one more example of a tintype here. This guy's name was Charles Doffenbaugh, and he served in the 26th Wisconsin. The 26th Wisconsin was made up mostly of German men, German immigrants from the Milwaukee area. And you can see in this picture, what's kind of neat about it is look behind him. Look at all the stuff that's behind the picture. You've got tents, you've got flags. A lot of times the guys would have their picture taken in a photo studio, and to make the picture look more exciting for the people back home, the soldier would stand in front of a backdrop, and that's what you're seeing here. All the stuff that's in the back, it's called the backdrop. So those are all examples of tintypes. Other examples were called ambrotypes. Another picture here of, this is another guy who served in the 26th Wisconsin. And you can see on the lower, I don't know, it's my lower right, maybe it's different for you, it says 26th Siegel Regiment. They painted it on the backdrop. They identified what regiment the guy was from. Here's another one from the same regiment. This guy's name, we know who this person was. His name was John Held. He was a cooper, meaning he made barrels. He was a barrel maker from Racine before the war. And he enlisted in the 26th Wisconsin in 1862, and he was killed in a battle just outside of Atlanta, Georgia, in the summer of 1864. And I mentioned that these are called ambrotypes. These are a little bit different than from those tintypes. You see how that's reflecting on the back? These images are mounted on glass instead of on the metal. So they're a little more fragile, and they're a little more rare, and they're a little more expensive to make. But those are called ambrotypes. Now the last kind of picture that I'll show you today, this is called a CDV, or carte de visite. And what's neat about these is these are mounted on paper. This is an artilleryman from Wisconsin. He had his picture taken. And this is mounted onto a paper card, almost like a football or baseball card. And on the back, the studio would put their mark. This picture was taken in Madison. And so we can tell that this guy was from Wisconsin, and who took it, because what the photographer wanted to do on the back is he wanted to advertise where his studio was. And so they would put that stamp on the back. So these are all ways of helping to identify who these men were, maybe where they got their picture taken, and give you a little more information on who each of them were. I think it helps us put faces to all these stories you hear about Gettysburg or Antietam, these huge battles. Well, what did these guys look like? What are they wearing? And one of the interesting things about photography, and I'll do one last picture. I can't really ask you this question, but I'll just tell you the answer. What are none of the men doing in any of these photographs? And the answer is smiling. Nor are they doing anything, right? They're all just kind of standing in a studio. And that's because photography at the time couldn't capture movement. You had to stand exactly still. Depending on how bright it was outside or where you were getting your picture taken, you had to stand still from anywhere between 10 to maybe 60 seconds. And if you moved, your picture got blurry. And you didn't want to send a blurry picture home to your mom and dad. And so basically what you did if you moved is you just wasted your money. So all the pictures were taken while the soldier was very stationary, and they often didn't smile because it's hard to hold a smile for that long of a time. So what else do we have to show you? What kind of uniforms did Civil War soldiers wear? I've got a couple of examples here. This is a reproduction frock coat. It's a little bit longer. It's a coat that comes down to about your thighs. Most of these coats would have had 9 buttons on them. Long sleeve. They're all made of wool. So in the wintertime, it's nice to have these heavy wool coats. In the summertime, if you're serving in Mississippi or Virginia, these coats are going to be really hot. But this is what's known as a frock coat. This is a reproduction. That's why I have it on a regular hanger. But this is a frock. Another reproduction style coat. This is known as a sack coat. This one only had 4 buttons. And a lot of the soldiers preferred this coat because it's shorter and it's more comfortable, and it would have been cooler in the summer. So, sack coat. Brett's going to shift me around. I've got 2 original coats here. These are uniform pieces that were actually worn by Civil War soldiers. Now, they look the same. They're called shell jackets. The one over here, I'm pointing at right now, this has 11 buttons in the front. This one has 12 buttons in the front. Now, that's not the only difference when it comes to these 2 coats. You notice this one over here is trimmed in red, while this one on this side is all trimmed in yellow. And if you go into your attic and you open up a trunk and you find a Civil War shell jacket up there, you're lucky enough to find that, there are certain clues based on the color and some of the things on the coat that can help you identify what branch of service this man would have served in. Red was the color of the artillery, meaning cannons. He would have been serving in the light artillery, serving in cannons, serving with cannons forces because he has the red piping. Also notice on this coat, what's kind of neat is these are called chevrons on his sleeve. Those tell us what rank he was. Now we know who the man was who wore this coat. His name was Friedrich Mallisch. He was a 20-year-old German immigrant. He was from Racine again, and he enlisted in the 6th Wisconsin Light Artillery in 1862 as a private. He served throughout the war. He mustered out, meaning he left the Army in 1865 after the war was over. And during his service, he was promoted because we know that these chevrons are for a first sergeant, meaning that he was promoted to more responsibility throughout the war. Now, these things down here at the bottom on near his cuff, you would say, well, Doug, I thought you said that red was the color of the artillery. Why does he have cavalry markings on his jacket? Why is that this is yellow? And the answer is that's not, those aren't cavalry markings. This is called a Veterans Service Bar. And when Friedrich Mallisch signed up to serve in the Army, he originally signed up to serve for 3 years. And his 3 years were up in 1864. He could have gone home. You couldn't certainly have blamed him for that. He probably had seen a lot. He had been wounded during his service. But when his service was up, he decided, you know what, I want to see the war through. And he decided to re-enlist until the end of the war. And what did he get for re-enlisting in 1864 to the end of the war? Well, one of the things he got was the honor to sew these veteran service bars on his coat. So when he was in the field or in camp, everybody would know, just by looking at his jacket, that this guy had served for 3 years and that he was a veteran. The other things he got for re-enlisting were about a $300 to $400 bonus or bounty when he came home. The government paid him $300 to $400 to re-enlist. Now, $300 to $400 is a lot of money now, but certainly not as much as it was during the Civil War, because a private would have been paid $13 a month during the war. So to get $300 or $400 in a lump sum payment like that was a lot of money for him. And the other thing he got when he re-enlisted was a furlough. A furlough was like a vacation. He got to come home for anywhere from like 30 to 40 days. He would have left the Army in Mississippi or in Tennessee or in Georgia, wherever they were at that time, and got to come home to Wisconsin for about a month to spend that time with his family. Then he would have had to return to go to the front. The other coat, the cavalry coat. Again, I told you it has all the trimmings, same stuff as the artillery, the Mallisch coat, only it's all in yellow. There's a little bit of difference here at the top. There's some of the markings are a little different, and like I said, this one has 12 buttons instead of the 11. It just has to do with where they were made. But you can figure out all these little details about the coats. But these are kind of neat because these are original pieces. The last thing I'll say about Mallisch is, I don't know if it comes through in the video, but okay, I'm 6'3", about 225 pounds. Does this coat look like it would fit me? No, it looks kind of small. Mallisch was about 5'6", about 130 pounds. He was a smaller guy, but the average height and weight of a Civil War soldier was 5'8", 140 pounds. So some of these jackets look like they'd fit more about, my son is 7 years old, and I think it would come closer to fitting him than it would me. So they're often a lot smaller than what we think of a garment would be today. All right, let's talk about weapons a little bit. This is what the majority of Civil War infantry soldiers would have carried with them. This is a Model 1861 Springfield rifled musket. It's called that because it was manufactured in Springfield, Massachusetts, from anywhere between 1861 and 1863. It was a single shot. It was muzzle loading, meaning that soldiers had to put the bullet in here from the muzzle. And there was a, so I'll answer your question, that's a good one. It was a single shot. It took 9 steps to load this weapon, and A good Civil War infantryman could fire 2 to 3 aimed shots in a minute with this. Now, how did you load it? Well, if you were standing, you would take a mini ball, of which I have examples of. We'll get close to this in a second. They would take the mini ball out of this. This is called the cartridge box. And a soldier would have up to 40 rounds could be stored in this cartridge box. And he would wear it. It doesn't have a cartridge box would have a sling on it. This one doesn't have it because it must have fallen off at some point. But they would wear the cartridge box on their hip. And they could reach in and grab the individual bullet out of the cartridge their hip on them. So they're right-handed. They would have reached in with their right hand. All of the mini balls came wrapped in paper. So the soldier had to take the mini ball and bite the paper with his teeth because it had all of the powder that needed to fire in that paper. Bite the cartridge, put the paper and all the black powder in the muzzle, in the top, right up here. I don't know if you guys can see this. This thing next to the muzzle, this is called a ramrod.
Doug, how long is the rifle?
It's 40 inches. The barrel is 40 inches long. Good question. So you take the paper cartridge, put it in here, take your ramrod out. Stuff all of that paper, that ball, all the way down to the bottom. Take this hammer, which you may or may not be able to see. I'll spin it around. Cock this back halfway. I can't do it. I don't want to do it with this one, but I can move this thing back. Up there's half cock. Then from there, the soldier would take a cap out of his pouch, little cap box here. This would also be worn on the belt. He'd take a cap out of the cap box, put it here on the end, pull the hammer all the way back, aim, and fire. Now, I mentioned something called the mini ball and what they were firing at each other. I don't know if I can show you this or not. These are mini balls. They're 58 caliber, meaning they're a little over ½ an inch in width, and they're made of lead. And they've got, you can see they've got some spiral grooves cut in the base. They don't look like a ball at all. They look more like a cone. There, that's a little better. And they have a hollow base. So when these things fired, what was interesting about these weapons was that those rings at the bottom of the bullet, the gas and the explosion would cause the ball to expand. And then on the interior of the barrel, it was rifled, meaning there were grooves, spiral grooves carved to the inside of this barrel. And when that ball came out, the grooves on the mini ball would grab the grooves on the inside of the barrel, causing it to spin as it came out. And what that did was give soldiers who had this weapon increased accuracy. A soldier could hit a target about 200 to 300 yards with the rifled musket, something that had rifles and grooves on the inside. Early on in the war, some soldiers had weapons that were exactly like this, loaded the same way, looked exactly the same, only there was no rifling on the inside of the barrel. They were called smoothbores. And with the bullets they fired out of those guns, they would be lucky to hit a target at about 50 or 75 yards. So what the rifling did in these mini balls, what that did was make the individual soldier a lot more accurate from a further distance away. And that's going to change how soldiers were going to fight throughout the war, because you had a lot more accuracy at a greater range. Made them a lot more dangerous. Now, what about cavalrymen, guys who fought on horseback? These long muskets wouldn't have been ideal for them. They would have used something called a carbine. Smaller than, you can see it's a lot shorter than the Springfield musket. It's a lot shorter because if you're riding on horseback, There's no way you could load and fire one of those long rifled muskets. These didn't load from the top. Remember I told you before that the rifled muskets loaded from the top. These are called breech loading weapons. And they loaded from places closer to where the trigger is, or the breech. They would come apart, and they had a single shot. They would go in there. I don't know if you can see that. But these carbines were what cavalry soldiers would have used. A lot quicker to load and fire, a lot easier to do it if you're riding on a horse with something like this, rather than something massive and huge like this. Okay, one last thing, and then I'll take your questions. That mini ball, 58 caliber, it's made of lead. When it hit people, it had a very dangerous and deadly effect. Because it was made of lead, if it hit your body, it had a tendency not to shatter or just glance off your bones. If it hit your bone, it would shatter it. Because when it hit your body, the lead, which is pretty soft by what I'm, from a metal standpoint, would flatten out and almost look like a pancake. And it would drag your uniform, it would drag dirt, it would drag bits of cloth, skin into the wound. And if it hit your bone, it was going to shatter it. It wasn't going to make it easy for them to repair your wound. And so a lot of people know, if you know anything about Civil War medicine, is surgeons performed a lot of amputations during the Civil War. And why did they do that? Well, one of the big reasons was these mini balls, because they created such horrific wounds to especially your arms and your legs. Now, how did doctors deal with those wounds? A lot of times, what they had to do was amputate. And I've got a surgical kit here. Everything a surgeon would have needed to, every piece of equipment he would have needed to do any surgical operation would have been housed in these wooden, velvet-lined cases. Now, this one was made by a company called Brinkerhoff in New York. We know it because it's stamped. And all the tools, from small scalpels to large amputating knives, were housed in that kit. Everything that the surgeon would have needed. I've got this is a tourniquet they would have used to try to cut off your blood flow. Right there, I can't see it. You guys can't see it. There's a tourniquet. Here's the classic bone saw. If they did have to perform an amputation, here's what the bone saw would have looked like. And why did they have to do so many of those amputations? Was it that American doctors were just dumb and they didn't know any better? No, it's because, think about certain battles like Antietam or Gettysburg. You've got so many casualties to deal with in such a short amount of time that the surgeons didn't have time to go in and piece the bone back together and try to save the soldier's arm. What they tried to do was amputate above where the person was wounded, create a clean wound, and hope that that wound would recover so that the soldier, maybe minus an arm or a leg or a foot or a hand, he would sacrifice that limb in order to survive. And if you were wounded during the Civil War, you wanted to be wounded as far away from the trunk, like your abdomen or your chest, as possible, because the mortality rate for amputations went up the closer it got to the trunk of your body. So I think there was about a 10 or 15% mortality rate if you had an amputation of your forearm. It went to about 33% if it was at your elbow, up to almost 50% at the shoulder. And the same thing with your legs. There are some pictures I've seen where Civil War soldiers have their entire leg amputated and carried away. Those men are lucky to be alive because they had about a 80 to 90% mortality rate when you're talking about a procedure like that. So one of the things I always tell people to remember from any of our programs, and when we're talking about Civil War medicine, I always ask people to remember two things. 5 minutes? Okay. Two last points, and I'll take your questions. One, 620,000 men died during the Civil War. That's both North and South. 2/3 of those men died of disease, not from wounds from carbines or artillery or these rifled muskets. They died of diseases like diarrhea, dysentery, mumps, typhoid fever. So the biggest and most dangerous time for the soldiers was their time in camp. Secondly, thing to remember. If you had to undergo an amputation like this with these tools, Civil War physicians had anesthesia, and they used it liberally. 90% of the operations that took place during the Civil War was while the person was anesthetized, so that they wouldn't feel the pain. What did they use for anesthesia? They used ether and chloroform. They would drip it on a rag, put it over a soldier's mouth and nose, and he would be anesthetized briefly while they would do the operation. One thing they didn't know about was bacteria and germs. If you go to the doctor today, the doctor's got gowns on, he washes his hands, he's got sterile instruments, he's got sterile gloves on. Doctors at the Civil War didn't know about bacteria and germs, and so they were operating. They may have taken these instruments, wiped them off on their shirt sleeve, maybe washed them off in a pail of water that they just got from a local creek, and then operated in a barnyard or outside or on a table or a barn door or something. So there was not a clean environment like we think of doctors operating in today. But remember those two facts. 620,000 men died during the Civil War, 2/3 of them died of disease, and that they did have anesthesia. And now, question and answers. Let's go back to the top.
Okay, the first question was, if a soldier died, would his family get the bonus?
Yeah, the first question was, if a soldier died, would the family get the bonus? In Wisconsin, soldiers got paid $13 a month. They could take extra parts of their pay and have it dedicated to go to their families. And so if a soldier did die, portions of his salary could go to his family. What you read in a lot of those letters that men are writing back from the front was they would send money back home after they got paid. Sometimes $50, $60, $100. They'd say, I sent you this money, let me know when you get it. Because it wasn't like today where they could just go to the ATM or go to a bank and make a transfer. They had to send the money home. So a lot of these soldiers were sending large sums of money home to their families. But in Wisconsin, they had a system where soldiers could dedicate extra bits of their pay so that their families would get that money. Next question. That was a good one.
What would happen if a soldier died? Would his family get his weapon, uniform, etc., and would they be able to bury their son?
Really good questions. A lot of times, if you were just a regular infantryman, an enlisted man, if you died on the battlefield, you would be taken to that portion of the battlefield where you died. They would dig a grave for you. Your friends would dig the grave, put you down in it. Hopefully they'd have a board or something they could mark who you were, what regiment, what company you were from, and mark where in Gettysburg. What they did was they went out onto the battlefield after the battle was over, dug up all those bodies, and moved them to that national cemetery. If you died in a hospital, say you were sick and you died of a disease in the hospital, a lot of times your body could be embalmed, and your family could pay to have it sent home so you could be buried at home. So it depended on whether you were killed in battle or maybe killed in a hospital, what rank you were. But a lot of men's remains did come home. Some of them are in national cemeteries at the battlefields. Some of them are still on the battlefield. And you still hear stories today at different battlefields that they're still finding remains of soldiers from the Civil War that they didn't know were there.
Did the soldiers have to buy their own weapons?
Yes and no. Ones like these, the Springfield rifle, they were issued to them by the government. In camp, they would get their weapons, and they wouldn't have to buy them. If you wanted something different than the Springfield rifle, something with a little more firepower, or something like Spencer repeating rifle, there are stories of those regiments going out and paying for them. Those Spencer repeating rifles cost $35. Now, do the math. If you're getting paid $13 a month, that's about 3 months of your pay that you would have to buy. And so most of the men used weapons that were issued to them by the government.
What weapons were more dangerous than guns?
Well, you had artillery pieces, you had those cannons, you had some of the cavalry soldiers carried sabers with them. But most of the men, as we said earlier, probably the most dangerous thing for all of these Civil War soldiers was their time in camp. The bad food that they're eating, the bad conditions that they're living under, and the fact that they didn't have built-in immunities to diseases meant that it's like in your class. If someone comes in sick on Monday, by Wednesday or Thursday, probably 50% of your class has that same cold. Same thing happened to these guys in camp, only on larger scales.
And the last question is, how many soldiers actually served from Wisconsin?
Yeah, good question. over 92,000 soldiers served from the state of Wisconsin. Our museum looks at the 6 states of the upper Midwest, so we talk about Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, Illinois, Iowa, and Minnesota, and Wisconsin sent 92,000. Hey, it was great meeting you guys. I hope you can come down and see the museum sometime. I hope you got something out of this. Teachers, please let Brett and I know how it went from your end.
No, go.
And we're glad we can do it. Take care.
Where? Let me do it for you. Let me do it for me. I don't know where.